The shattered announcement. The night my world crumbled didn't begin with thunder or storm clouds. It began with the clinking of silverware on fine china. We were sitting around the long oak dining table at my father's mansion, a place that never felt like home after my mother passed. My father, Robert, had remarried only a year after her funeral, and since then everything had changed. His new wife, Veronica, was 20 years younger, with a sharp smile that never reached her eyes. And then there was him, Ethan, her son from a previous marriage. He was my age, 25, but somehow in just a few short months, he had become the golden boy of the family. That evening I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate while my father laughed at Ethan's story about closing some business deal he had supposedly brokered. My father's booming laugh filled the room, the same laugh he used to reserve for my accomplishments. Now it was Ethan's soundtrack. "Everyone, I have an announcement," my father said suddenly, raising his glass of wine. His voice carried authority, the kind that demanded attention. I froze, my fork clattering against the plate. He looked at me, then at Ethan, then back at Veronica, who gave him a proud, knowing nod. "I've updated my estate plans," he said with a smug smile. "It's time to think about the future, about who will carry on my legacy. Ethan has shown me drive, ambition, loyalty. He has stepped up in ways I could only dream of." I felt my stomach knot as his words sank in. "So," he continued, "I've decided to make Ethan my primary heir. He'll inherit the business, the properties. Everything. It's only right." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Everything. Did I hear him correctly? I had been his only child for 25 years. My mother, his first wife, stood beside him through the building of his empire. And now, in a single sentence, he had erased me. "What about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't flinch. "You'll be fine," he said coldly, as if I were some distant cousin, not his flesh and blood. "I've set aside something small for you, but Ethan will be the future of this family." Ethan smirked, lowering his eyes in mock humility, but I saw the triumph glittering there. Veronica reached out, placing her manicured hand over my father's, as if to seal the betrayal with a gesture of love. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand how he could betray me and my mother's memory like this. But all I managed to say was, "You're making a mistake." He waved me off. "No, I'm making the right decision. It's time you grew up and accepted that." The rest of dinner blurred. My chest felt heavy, each breath like fire. As I sat there, surrounded by their laughter, I realized something with a clarity that burned. I wasn't just being cut off from my inheritance. I was being erased, replaced, written out of my own family's story. And in that moment, beneath the rage and humiliation, a vow formed in my heart. If my father wanted to throw me away like I was nothing, then I would prove to him that I was everything. This wasn't over. The days after that lawyer's meeting were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. My father had spoken those words so casually. "The inheritance will go to Lucas, my wife's son," as if my entire existence could be brushed aside with a flick of his pen. I remember sitting at the dinner table that same night, staring at the food I couldn't eat. Across from me, Lucas, the so-called golden boy, was smiling, basking in the glow of a victory he hadn't even earned. He acted as though my father's fortune had always belonged to him, like it was his birthright. Lucas wasn't just smug, he was calculated. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fork against his plate, and said, "Don't take it too hard. Dad just wants what's best for the family. I guess that makes me the responsible one." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Responsible. This was the same guy who barely passed college, who jumped from one failed business idea to the next, living off handouts and my father's blind generosity. Yet somehow he was being painted as the worthy heir, while I, the one who stayed loyal, worked hard, and stood by my father through his worst years, was being erased. My stepmother, Vanessa, sat there with her perfect posture and cold smile. She didn't have to say a word. The triumph in her eyes said it all. She'd orchestrated this. I could feel it. Every calculated dinner conversation, every time she whispered in my father's ear when she thought I wasn't watching, it had all been leading to this moment. I excused myself from the table, my chest tight with rage. Upstairs in my old room, I paced the floor, my fists clenched. Why is he doing this? Why am I not enough? I wanted to storm back down, demand answers, scream until someone admitted the truth. But deep down, I knew my father's mind was made up. At least, that's what they wanted me to believe. Because here's the thing about secrets, they always find a way out. And though I didn't know it yet, there were cracks in their perfect little plan. Cracks big enough to shatter everything they'd built. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I made myself a promise. If they thought they could steal my future, they were in for a surprise. I wouldn't go quietly. I'd find the truth. No matter what it cost me. And little did I know, the first clue was already closer than I imagined. What I discovered hidden in my father's office changed everything I thought I knew about him, about Lucas, and about why my inheritance had really been stolen. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. My father barely spoke to me unless Vanessa was around, and when he did, his words were clipped, almost rehearsed. Lucas, on the other hand, strutted through the mansion as though it had been built for him. He paraded around in my father's car, wore watches I knew were meant for me one day, and sneered whenever our eyes met. But what unsettled me most wasn't the showboating, it was the whispers. Late at night, as I passed the long hallway leading to my father's study, I would hear muffled voices. Sometimes it was Vanessa, her tone sharp and calculating. Sometimes Lucas, laughing in that smug, hollow way that made my skin crawl. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the heavy oak door of my father's office, careful not to make a sound. My heart hammered as I caught fragments of conversation. "He doesn't suspect a thing," Vanessa whispered. "Good," Lucas replied. "The lawyer said everything will be ready. Once it's signed, it's mine." There was a pause, then Vanessa added, "He'll never see it coming. By the time he does, it'll be too late." I felt my chest tighten, like the walls of the hallway were closing in. What exactly were they talking about? What was ready? And why did it sound like I was the one being erased from my father's life? I backed away before the floor creaked under my weight, retreating to my room where I sat in silence, replaying every word in my mind. My father wasn't naive. He had built an empire with his own hands. So why did it feel like he was under their spell, blinded to their manipulation? The next morning, over breakfast, I tried to study his face. His eyes looked tired, distant, like he carried a burden he couldn't share. Vanessa sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, smiling sweetly at him but glaring daggers at me whenever he wasn't looking. Lucas, of course, acted like a prince, charming my father with stories of his plans for the future. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead I stayed quiet. One wrong word, and they would know I was on to them. But deep inside, a fire began to grow. If Vanessa and Lucas thought they could steal everything from me, they were mistaken. I wasn't going to let whispers behind closed doors decide my future. One discovery in my father's office would confirm my worst fears, and reveal that Vanessa's plan had started long before I ever realized. I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the faint voices I had overheard when I walked past my father's office. Vanessa's hushed, sharp tone and Lucas's arrogant laugh. Something about papers, and as long as he doesn't find out. Those words had burned into my brain, refusing to let me rest. So the next day, when the house was unusually quiet, I took my chance. My father had gone to a business lunch, Vanessa was out at her charity event, and Lucas had stormed off to the gym after bragging about some new car he wanted. For the first time in weeks, the mansion was mine. I walked to the office, his office. The heavy oak door seemed to weigh twice as much as usual as I pushed it open. The smell of leather and cigar smoke lingered, wrapping me in a mixture of nostalgia and dread. This room had once felt like a sanctuary when I was a child. I'd sit in that oversized chair and pretend to be just like him, a leader strong and untouchable. But now, it felt like enemy territory. The desk was immaculate, just as I remembered. But something about the top drawer caught my eye. The lock, usually polished, looked scratched as if someone had been prying it open. My heart raced as I searched the shelves for the old brass key I knew my father kept hidden. And sure enough, behind a row of leather-bound ledgers, there it was. The lock clicked open with a soft snap, and inside were folders neatly stacked. My hands trembled as I pulled one out. Bank statements, property deeds. And then I saw it. A set of documents stamped with the lawyer's seal. My eyes scanned the lines until the words blurred. Transfer of inheritance rights. Froze. This wasn't just my father's decision. It had been prepared long before that day at the lawyer's office. It looked rehearsed, manipulated. My father's signature was there, but the dates didn't make sense. Some of these papers were drawn up months before Vanessa and Lucas even moved into the mansion. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. My blood ran cold. I stuffed the documents back, closed the drawer, and shoved the key in my pocket. Just as I turned around, the door creaked open. Lucas leaned against the frame, arms crossed, smirking. "Snooping, are we?" he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Careful." Curiosity killed the cat. I swallowed hard, forcing my face to stay neutral. But inside, one thought was screaming louder than all the rest. They've been planning this for far longer than I realized. And if Lucas had caught me in the act, then the game was only just beginning. What Lucas said next made my blood run cold, and revealed that Vanessa's plan wasn't just about money. It was about destroying me completely. The night after I discovered the hidden documents in my father's study, I couldn't close my eyes. My thoughts twisted and turned, looping the same questions. How long had Vanessa been planning this? Why was my father letting it happen? And what was Lucas's role in all of it? I knew one thing with certainty. If I confronted them without proof, they would twist my words, make me out to be paranoid or bitter. Vanessa was a master manipulator, and Lucas, well, he thrived on making me look weak. So I decided to do something I had never done before. I would set a trap. The next morning, I acted as though nothing was wrong. At breakfast, I laughed at Lucas's hollow jokes, nodded politely at Vanessa's fake compliments, and tried to hide the storm brewing in my chest. My father glanced at me curiously a few times, as though sensing something beneath the surface, but said nothing. Later that day, when the house was quiet, I returned to my father's office. This time I wasn't there to snoop. I was there to plant evidence of my own. I left a voice recorder, carefully hidden behind the row of thick law books on the shelf. If Vanessa and Lucas were scheming as openly as I suspected, their own words would condemn them. Hours passed before I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly retreated to my room, heart hammering, and left the recorder to do its work. That evening, while everyone was distracted in the dining room, I slipped back into the office and retrieved the device. My palms were sweaty as I pressed play, praying I hadn't risked everything for nothing. Static crackled at first, then Vanessa's voice came through, sharp as a blade. "He thinks it's all for him," she said. "But once the will is finalized, he'll have no claim." Lucas laughed. "And the best part? He doesn't even realize Dad was manipulated into signing. By the time he figures it out, we'll own it all." My blood ran cold. Manipulated. They weren't just planning to steal. They had already twisted my father's trust, perhaps forged his hand in legal agreements, or worse, tricked him into signing something he didn't fully understand. The conversation ended with Vanessa's chilling words. "As long as he stays in the dark, nothing can stop us. He's too blinded by guilt to question me." I sat frozen, the recorder clutched tightly in my hand. Guilt. What guilt was she talking about? My father wasn't a perfect man, but guilt so heavy it made him blind. That was something new, something dangerous. The trap had worked, but instead of answers, I had even more questions. And one thing became clear. If I didn't act soon, there wouldn't be an inheritance left to fight for. When I confronted my father with the recording, I expected relief. Instead, His reaction shook me to my core, and revealed the heartbreaking truth Vanessa had been using against him all along. I held the recorder in my trembling hand like it was a weapon. For the first time, I had undeniable proof that Vanessa and Lucas were conspiring against me. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed my father to hear it. He had to understand that the people he trusted most were the ones dismantling everything he had built. That night I went to his study. He was seated behind his heavy oak desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, reviewing a stack of papers. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders bent with a quiet weariness. "Dad," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "We need to talk." He glanced up, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. "What is it?" I set the recorder on his desk and pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room, followed by Lucas's cruel laughter. For a long moment, my father sat frozen, his face unreadable. When the recording ended, I expected anger. I expected him to rage against the betrayal. But instead, he removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and whispered, "I already knew." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You what? You knew. And you let them." "Stop," he interrupted sharply, but his voice cracked. "You don't understand." His hands shook as he reached for a small drawer in his desk. From it, he pulled out an envelope, yellowed and creased from years of handling. He slid it across to me. "This is what she's been holding over me." Inside was a letter. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an old business document, but as I read, my stomach twisted. It was a confession. Years ago, during a desperate business deal, my father had cut corners, shady ones. Nothing violent, nothing illegal that could land him in prison, but unethical enough to ruin his reputation and legacy if it became public. "She found this years ago," my father admitted, his voice breaking. "And she's been using it against me ever since. If I don't comply, she'll destroy everything I've built. Everything that will one day be yours." Suddenly, it all made sense. The way he let Vanessa walk over him. The way Lucas strutted through the house like he owned it. My father wasn't blind. He was trapped. "But Dad," I whispered, leaning closer. "Don't you see? By giving in, you've already let her destroy everything. She's taking what's ours piece by piece. She doesn't need the letter anymore, she's already winning." For the first time his mask cracked. His eyes, usually stern and commanding, filled with regret. He looked not like the powerful businessman I had grown up fearing, but like a man who realized too late that his choices had doomed his family. "I thought I was protecting you," he whispered. "I thought if I gave her what she wanted, at least you'd be safe." My heart pounded in my chest. All the resentment I'd carried toward him for years was suddenly tangled with pity. But pity wasn't enough. "Then it's time we stop letting her control us," I said firmly. "Together. No more secrets, no more giving in. We fight back." He hesitated, his lips trembling as though the very idea of defying Vanessa terrified him. But then he nodded, slowly, like a man who had just decided to finally face his executioner. And in that moment I knew. The real battle hadn't even started yet. We thought confronting Vanessa would end her game, but when we brought everything to the lawyer's office, the truth that came out was darker than anything we could have imagined. The air in the lawyer's office was heavy, almost suffocating. My father sat beside me, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on the mahogany table. Across from us sat Vanessa in her designer suit, Lucas with his smug grin plastered across his face. They thought they had won. They thought today would end with me stripped of everything my father had ever promised me. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the transfer of assets, as previously directed." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Actually, before we proceed, I'd like to present new evidence." Vanessa's smile faltered for the briefest second. She tried to cover it with a laugh. "Evidence? What is this, a courtroom drama? Let's not waste everyone's time." But my father surprised everyone by placing the recorder on the table. He pressed play. The office filled with Vanessa's venomous voice and Lucas's greedy laughter, plotting to bleed my father dry and seize the inheritance. The words echoed like a curse. Lucas's smirk evaporated. Vanessa's face drained of color. That doesn't prove anything," she stammered. The lawyer, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "On the contrary, Mrs. Whitmore. This recording demonstrates coercion, manipulation, and potential fraud in the handling of Mr. Whitmore's estate. If this is submitted to court, not only would you lose any claim to his assets, but there may be grounds for criminal charges." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's eyes darted to my father, then to me. For the first time her mask cracked. "You wouldn't dare." My father stood, his voice stronger than I had heard it in years. "I would. And I should have a long time ago." Lucas slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. You can't cut me out. I deserve this." "You deserve nothing," my father thundered, his voice shaking the room. "You're not my son. You're a parasite who leached off my guilt and weakness." The lawyer cleared his throat again, almost relishing the moment. "Given this evidence, I strongly advise revisiting the terms of the will. Mr. Whitmore, would you like to make an amendment?" My father looked at me, his eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "Yes. Effective immediately. Everything goes to my rightful heir. My child. No one else." My breath caught in my throat. After years of feeling invisible, of being pushed aside for Vanessa and Lucas, those words landed like a promise, like justice finally being restored. Vanessa hissed, "If you do this, I'll expose everything. That letter, your past mistakes." But my father didn't flinch. "Do it. I'm done living in fear. The truth may tarnish my name, but it won't destroy my soul. You already tried to do that, and you failed." The lawyer began drafting the amendment right there, his pen scratching across the paper like a final nail in their coffin. Lucas stormed out, cursing under his breath, while Vanessa sat frozen, her carefully constructed empire of manipulation collapsing around her. When it was over, my father leaned back in his chair, looking at me with tired eyes. "I should have been braver sooner," he whispered. I reached for his hand. "It's not too late, Dad. You chose me. That's what matters." For the first time in years, I saw peace in his expression. The inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming what was ours, what was right. And as Vanessa's footsteps faded down the hallway, I knew her reign of control was finally over. The truth had come out, and with it so had our freedom.